Crossing. And I am excited to have Erin May Lewis here again with us today for the two of us to take a look at this topic today. Is it me? Is it my dulcimer? Is it my dulcimer or is it me?
Yeah, sometimes there's a buzz or a ringing sound or my fingers hurt a lot when I'm playing. And the question is there something wrong with my dulcimer or do I need to do something differently? Am I being impatient and I just have to work through the pain points, or is there something that I really actually need to change? So we want to talk about that.
Yeah, I think this is one of those live kind of questions that happens for everybody because when we're doing
Yeah.
something new, we always assume, sometimes correctly, that we're doing it wrong.
Right. I don't know what I'm doing, so clearly it's me.
And
It could not
sometimes
be my
that's
tools. It
and
must be me.
and it's, that's not out of the realm of possibility. Sometimes
Mhm.
we are the reason. It's just our inexperience and not knowing and doing something different. But other times it is the instrument, and there are some adjustments that can be made to the instrument to make a difference. And this
Yeah.
doesn't only relate to mountain dulcimers, it also relates to hammer dulcimers. And I have an example for that we'll use later. But let's talk about first fingertips, because I think the thing that a lot of us experience when we're playing, particularly a steel stringed instrument, is pain, right?
Sore fingers.
It's I get sore. When I first started playing guitar, I took my nylon strings off my guitar and put on steel strings. That caused a problem with the bridge later on, where immediately it was difficult under my fingers. And
Yeah.
it felt like every finger was on fire. And I was sure that they were going to start bleeding at any minute. And I just, I was gritting my teeth playing and I wasn't getting the sound I wanted. And it made me so disappointed. I just put it down. And I tried to watch TV. I tried to read a book. I tried to do chores. And all of them, all I wanted to do was play. So I came back and gritted my teeth and did it some more. The process seemed like it lasted forever, but it was really only a couple weeks,
Yeah.
as long as I kept doing it. If I stopped until the pain went away and started up again, whoa, there's that pain. So
Right.
that is that, adjustment period that has to happen with anything new, but especially when what you're doing is supposed to create some calluses on your fingers. Did you have an experience like that?
Well, I was very young when I started playing the dulcimer, so I do not remember my first getting calluses. But what I do remember is that when I went through my cancer treatments when I was 20, one of the side effects is all rapidly dividing cells are killed, including skin cells. And so my calluses ceased to exist after, I don't know, 2 treatments. There just weren't calluses on my fingers anymore. And there was nothing I would be able to do to have calluses during that time period because just the nature of what was happening is that the skin sloughs off faster. Therefore, you can't have calluses. So I remember playing without calluses during that period, the soreness and the tenderness, and then the rebuilding of calluses after that, and realizing like, oh, I will have calluses again. It's just a season of time. So if I have students who are really struggling with the discomfort and we have assessed that their dulcimer is fine and they want something to sort of help bridge that space, my recommendation is liquid Band-Aid.
Liquid
It's
band aid.
it sort of functions or some sort of, some sort of like another layer of skin. There's a few different names for the liquid Band-Aid product, but essentially it's like giving yourself one extra layer of calluses on those fingers, and it can just help a little bit with like, okay, they're not going to bleed. They're not going to. They're okay. I have taken care of my fingers. I can play. It's still uncomfortable. You'll still feel the pressure of the strings on your not callous fingers, but it gets better.
And the beauty of calluses versus finger cots or something like that, which I've also heard recommended, is they don't stick to the strings And finger
Yeah.
cots are designed to stick to things. That's why you use them when you're counting money or paper or something like that. Talon suggesting electric tape. The black
That's what,
electrical tape.
bass players do for their right hand, their
Yeah,
picking hand, a lot of times is wrap some tape around that finger that's plucking
yeah.
the strings over and over again.
So it's like giving yourself a manicure, but on the other side with the little brush, right?
Yeah. Yep, that's how I think about it.
And then they last for a little bit, and they need a little. They may need an up, what do you call it, retread,
Yeah,
but they aren't going to need a whole lot because if you keep playing, you're actually developing under that. You're
that's right.
developing the calluses.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you accidentally lose a callus for some reason, sometimes they break off or they get a little thing and it gets caught on something. Doing that, fixing that with just one finger is also another option. So
Mhm.
that's a good "is it me" kind of thing. Um, what if how
Sometimes you can make an adjustment to your dulcimer, though, to make it a little easier in that process too, like, I play with fairly heavy gauge strings, but I always suggest with new students whose hands don't have calluses or young kids, just put a little bit lighter strings on your dulcimer so you don't have quite as much tension. It's not quite as much work to press that string down if the gauge of the string is lighter. You can't maybe strum as hard. Gotta lighten up on your strumming hand, but that also might be a good practice for you.
it could be? Yeah, you're driving your semi truck over the flower bed with your
Mhm.
strumming hand over the light strings
Mhm.
instead of
Mhm.
tiptoeing through the tulips. You might, yeah, that's a
Yeah.
I know that I built my first dulcimer, and so I carved all the notches and did all that kind of thing. And the instructions said put three nickels on top of each other, and then put that at the bridge, and that's how high the string should be off the fretboard. Three nickels is pretty thick, and
That sounds pretty high.
and I eventually said it was really hard to play everywhere. And it's my dulcimer. I built it, so I didn't feel bad about it. I just notched my notches lower. But the thing I experienced was I had to be careful how low I went on this side because if this side was pretty low, I could create a string buzz back here. And
Mhm.
the strings, the frets wouldn't make any difference. I'd push a push here. I'm going to change cameras for me so you can see what I mean when I say here. And let's get that one that got knocked cockeyed. I push here and here and here, and I get the same note for all three, which means I had a high
Mhm.
fret right here.
Yeah.
And the two ways to deal with that is to have the string come up a little higher or to have the fret filed down.
Mhm.
And those are two different things. That may not be a user fix. But if you're
That's right.
crafty and you have fret files, which are not just like a regular mill rasp or a mill bastard or something like that's the name of that particular file. It's grooved a little bit so that you're filing over the fret to crown it again after you've got all the dents in it that come from playing it for a long time. If you have that kind of a file, you might be able to do it, but maybe not.
Mhm.
Talon, you're noting a nickel at the seventh fret should just have breathing room. So there you go. That is generally these days because that was over 40 years ago in my handwritten instructions that came with the kit. That now people use things in metric inches, so it's point something, point zero point something or other that, or maybe not point zero because that's the strings, but it's going to be a measurement that could be made at the seventh fret and at the 12th fret or at the bridge, which are luthier kind of tricks. So if you want
Right.
to check out what the luthiers say, that's something you can always do.
Mhm.
Um, so that has to do with string height and string gauges. Um, is there anything
There's
else we
also
want to talk
the
about?
buzzing that happens
Ah,
if we don't have our finger in the right place on the fretboard or we aren't actually pressing down quite enough, but that you can sometimes have buzzing because you have a high fret, like you were naming, or you have actually some part of your fretboard needs an adjustment. And so sometimes assessing, is it my fingers or my hand position, or is it that my instrument always buzzes in this place? So let me change my camera. So, first thing is to note where in the space of the fret your finger is, and making sure that you're kind of toward the strumming side of the space, not toward the headstock side of the space or towards the right side of the space. Um, but then I start to get curious about, does it happen on every string at that fret? Does the buzzing only happen when I'm pressing down with my ring finger? But if I press with my index finger, everything seems to be fine? Because if that's true, then the problem is my ring finger, not my fret, right? If it happens on every string, then I might have a problem with a fret. But if it happens only on one string, I might want to play with how hard am I pressing and where am I at? Am I actually touching the fret, or am I too far away from it? Am I not in that kind of sweet spot for it? Or am I pressing too hard? I'm actually mashing the string into the uh, fretboard too much. Or am I over strumming? And when I'm over strumming, it's causing this like extra big vibration. I don't even know. Yeah, like that. I can get that like clunk sound out of my dulcimer, and that can be a strumming hand issue. So I just get really, really curious about the micro sounds. A lot of times people will notice, like, oh, well, when I play a C chord, something buzzes. Okay, that's good to know. Now take one finger at a time. Is your pinky finger by itself buzzing? Is your ring finger by itself buzzing? What if you play those two together? Sometimes what happens is one of my fingers is a little too flat and I'm touching a string, and that's causing a buzzing sound. So if I play just one finger, it's fine. But when I add a second finger, now it buzzes. So there can be adjustments to our hands and our positions and how we press that can fix a buzz, usually.
Well, the other thing that I've noticed, a lot of people they're tired when they come to their dulcimer. And especially if they have a bout right here, they'll lay their hand here and play, and then they'll reach across to try to do things. And that's when, instead of coming down on top of the string with my fingertips, I'm playing with the flat part. Not only
Mhm.
do my fingers not all reach the dulcimer at the same place, but that's where something can be laying so flat that it's touching and you don't notice that it's
Mhm.
touching.
Mhm.
And also, then I have to push so hard with my finger to get that same kind of clear tone. Where if I had let the weight of my hand, by keeping my hand off of the dulcimer, only touching it with my fingertips, my hand can help with gravity. I mean, gravity can help that. Now, if you're someone who plays over the top of your instrument, gravity isn't going to help that exact same thing in the same way. And that's when I stand to play and teach this way, I notice I have to adjust my hand in order to not have some of that buzzing.
Mhm.
And if I'd be playing kind of like what your typical way is, that
Yeah.
kind of a 45 or something like that angle,
Mhm.
then you kind of get the benefit of the gravity and that, right?
Mhm. Yep.
So hand position and letting gravity help you is a good thing. Um,
Mhm.
and also not anchoring your hand so that you can't really reach something because it's laying flat here and kind of stuck here. When it's not anchored, then I can move up and down the fretboard a lot more smoothly.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I rest my thumb on the side of my dulcimer a lot, but it also moves a lot. Like my whole thumb is moving, and it's sort of guiding my whole hand into position. So my hand is very much sort of moving as I go up and down the fretboard, as opposed to trying to reach something. And I've had tendonitis in this part of my wrist And so one of the things I had to make an adjustment for is that when I stretch to reach something, and I have hypermobile joints in my stretch, that I was often stretching my pinky sort of back and by itself. And so
Mm,
then my pinky was doing all of the work of pressing, and the weight of my hand was more toward my index finger and thumb. And I had to make an adjustment to actually get my elbow out a little bit further so that my elbow lines up with my pinky finger even when I'm stretching. And then I'm like stretching forward, and the weight of my arm lines up with my pinky instead of lining up with my index finger. Well, our pinky and ring fingers are our weaker fingers. So that's just a helpful thing in general, that the weight, if you kind of think about where is the straight line from my elbow, I want it to be with my pinky. I don't necessarily need it to be with my thumb, because my thumb is stronger already. Because in real life, other things besides playing dulcimer, you probably use your thumb quite a bit, but probably not so much your pinky.
I got a question. When you say it's resting on the dulcimer, is it more sliding along the fretboard, or is it more resting on the dulcimer, or is it in the crease?
So, yes, it because so actually, this dulcimer you can really see where my thumb rests,
Oh, you got a
because the
groove,
pen is
right?
squaring. Uh huh.
Yeah.
So my thumb rests here,
Okay.
and then as I come up, my thumb rests here.
Okay.
So it changes, but part of that I think has to do with the fact that my dulcimer is not flat across my lap like this. It's at an angle, so the headstock is towards my left knee, and then it's also tilted up a little bit. And so
Yeah.
I have not flat on my lap, tilted up a little bit, definitely at an angle where the headstock is more towards my knee, and the wider curve is tight against my stomach. So when I'm here, my thumb is resting on the top of the fretboard, but is also, or the soundboard, but it's also touching the fretboard. The tip of my
Okay.
thumb is touching the fretboard. But as I come up here, my thumb goes into the curve of the dulcimer somewhat,
Okay.
and actually rests on the side of the instrument, and then as I come up here, it's back on the top again.
Okay.
But it's
Interesting.
not touching the fretboard here. It's
Yeah.
a little further away.
This is a side note, but it relates to what we're talking about. I've always told people that if I could have um, Larry Conger's thumb and Aaron May and Aaron O'Rourke's pinkies, I would have the perfect hand. And of watching you and playing with you and looking at Aaron O'Rourke's exercises, I've been a year at working with my pinky, and I did some exercises the other day that I wrote that didn't involve the pinky, and all of a sudden my pinky was playing. So
Nice.
it only took a year. No, it took a year to surprise me and not have to think about it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's kind of like the building up of the calluses. As we do something over and over again, it can seem like a chore at the beginning, and then you forget about the chore, and then all of a sudden it can become automatic. And
Yeah.
so that's in terms of technique. The is it me? That would be a is it me thing, technique kind of thing. Um, we talked about why to have, or the idea of having some lighter strings if you're having some problems. You mentioned that you use heavier strings. Why did you choose that?
Um, I do not have a light touch on the dulcimer. I I have a pretty aggressive playing style, a pretty aggressive strum. I like to play with other instruments a lot. Um, Bluegrass is my primary context. It's fast and usually 4 to 8 people kind of playing together in a circle. And so I wanted my dulcimer to have more kind of punch and volume, And that means that when I'm gonna strum it nice and hard, I don't want the strings to flop at all. And so I have my action a little bit higher and I have my strings a little bit heavier. So my dulcimer fights me just a little bit. But that allows me to really dig in and play like a pretty crisp single string punchy punchy sound on my instrument. Whereas if I had lower action and I had lighter strings, when I start to do that, I get a little buzzing sound.
Because
So
that's where you're talking about your strum maybe
mhm,
having to be a little more delicate
yeah,
or
that's
elegant.
right.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Now,
I was playing some of the, new harmony dulcimers that they just had for display at the Black Mountain Festival, and I said, "Man, I'm liking the playability of these a lot, but I would definitely need my action adjusted. I'm getting buzzing." And the, head luthier was like, "Oh, yeah, you're getting buzzing because you need the action a little bit higher." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, I do."
so there that is a good argument for matching the dulcimer to your style of playing.
Yeah.
We've talked about Christian Hewitt did a workshop with us last autumn, in which he talked about using very light gauge strings and
Mhm,
plugging in and turning up the gain so that he could do all the intricate fingerstyle things that he did. If
mhm,
you mentioned to me that when you tried to do those on your dulcimer with your action and your strings, it wasn't working the same. And then it's
mhm.
like, oh yeah, he told us that.
Right. Yeah, part of it is like, so if I do a hammer on at the fourth fret, I get quite a bit of noise out of my dulcimer. I don't know. I realize my microphone is on the other dulcimer, how well you can really hear it. But there's a lot of extra sound in that. And that's because my action is high and this part of the string is also ringing when I do a hammer on. So I can do some things to kind of mute that, like deaden the string behind the place where I want the hammer on to happen so that this part isn't buzzing so much. But also, I just don't do hammer ons with bigger space. And a big part of Christian Hewitt's style is to do like a hammer on here and then also hammer on a bigger space away with his other hand, and it's beautiful and it's noisy on my dulcimer because my dulcimer is definitely not set up for that.
So that, like has been mentioned in the chat, this is why we keep our favorite luthiers in business, because we might need more than one kind of dulcimer to play the kinds of music we want to play.
Yeah.
I, based on your experience playing with you, but also playing with my fiddling pal, Vi Wickham, who really digs into the fiddle, there's so much tone there. And my dulcimer strung with the strings that it came with just seemed anemic in tandem. And then when
Mhm.
I'd play with you, it's like, oh, mine doesn't seem to match. Obviously, there's a lot of differences in our styles of play and kinds of dulcimer. And it was mentioned earlier that somebody prefers the double string rather than, and I always have a double string on most of my instruments. So that's
Mhm.
one of the differences. But when I beefed my strings up with your consultation, it balanced our duo a lot better because
Yeah.
there was more there. It does
Mhm.
mean I have to play it differently.
Right.
Um,
Right.
there's one other variation, and I want to make sure I don't forget hammer dulcimer, so I'm mentioning that. But
Uh-huh.
you have a radiused fretboard, right?
I do on this dulcimer. Mhm.
And that can make a difference. The size of frets can make a difference.
Yeah.
Um, I
This
don't know
dulcimer
that
has jumbo frets. This is my chromatic, obviously. It has jumbo frets up to here, and then it has smaller frets as it gets into the higher octaves.
interesting. I
So
hadn't heard about that hybrid. When I had this nylon string, I asked for the flat fretboard because I don't play up like this. I play on my lap mostly.
mhm.
But the large frets mean my touch has to be a lot lighter.
Right.
And it's similar to, in that way, of playing Galax with my noter, as it's I call it skating over the string. I'm not pushing down, I'm just skating. There's enough height in the fret that when I'm behind and close, the string is stopped where it should be, and it lets me play more smoothly. So sometimes the lower frets don't help that. Sometimes they do.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. The bigger
Or the
frets, I
smaller.
do think make a difference in not having to press as hard. So even though I have higher action and heavier strings, sometimes my hand gets more tired playing my dulcimer with the flat fretboard that actually has lighter gauge strings on it. So this one I have a double melody string, and I use I use 12, 14, 20 something on the bass. And on this dulcimer, I'm using 14, 16, 20 something, and it's a shorter scale length too. So there's even more tension in the string because it's not as long. Um, but my hand will get more tired on this dulcimer because it has smaller frets and it's got the flat fretboard. And so I notice like pressing and holding chords on this dulcimer makes my hand feel more tired than it does on this dulcimer with higher action and heavier strings, but also bigger frets and a radius fretboard.
So there's
So
like four different variables there.
there are.
Jamie's mentioning that sometimes when she calls it a technical term, smooshing, when we're really smooshing to get something, if the strings are not providing enough resistance to us, it's real easy to push them out of tune.
Yeah.
You can slide back and forth. You can even, if the strings are too light of a gauge, when I push a little harder, I can hear the string go in and out of tune depending on the pressure on the string. So that's
Mhm.
another piece of, it's, is it me, is it my string? I might modulate the string a little bit if I find that that's a lot of problem. The other thing I was going to say about this is, when I was recording Ala Nanita Nana on my "Twas in the Moon of Wintertime" recording, which is, holy smokes, 20 years old this year. It was released, I think, in March of 2003. But you play it, you work on it, you practice it, you play it, you listen to the mixes, and then I go, huh, that really sounds not nice. There's a lot of noise. It was sounds of my fingers on the fingerboard, sounds of the strings when I was picking my fingers up, ping, little pull offs I didn't intend, and all these kind of things. And I went back to the engineer and said, I really don't like this. He just looked at me with one of those sympathetic grins, said, this is the way you played it. And it really was not the instrument. It was my technique, and I wasn't happy with it, so I had to go practice a lot on just that tune and re-record it so that I could get it in the neighborhood of what I wanted it to be.
Mhm.
Now, for hammer dulcimer, there's not as much that we tend to talk about with there's certainly not anything in terms of the touching of the strings, but there is a place to hit the strings where there's kind of about an inch away from the bridge is usually the sweet spot. And for me, an inch is this knuckle, the first knuckle of my pinky. So if I aim for something like closer and I really hear wood or bridge further away, I hear a different tone, and I have the possibility of accidentally touching a different string because of this valley between the bridges. And that's what I wanted to call attention to. I had an instrument that was the first one that had a bridge on this side, and this bridge was way over here. And I had a really hard time playing in the optimal place to play and in the place where I was going to hit the string I wanted and not the string I didn't. And so I
Uh-huh.
asked the builder if it was possible to move this bridge a little ways further. So I actually sent it back to him, and the builder did that, and it made the playability and actually tone. It was a much smaller instrument than this, so tone was really not a big difference because it didn't change a lot, but it made the playability and the accuracy a whole lot easier to achieve. So in that case, it was partly my technique, but partly when it was too close, this an inch away here and an inch away here, put these really close to each other, and it made it
Yeah.
almost impossible to play the right string when I wanted to. And certainly when I realized what was happening, it made me more anxious. And that made it even more harder to play the accurate one because now I'm
Right.
thinking, oh no, I'm going to miss it. And then sure enough, I did.
Yeah.
Well, if someone is discovering or trying to discern this, what can we suggest to them to do when they're trying to sort out, is it my dulcimer or is it me? One
So
piece,
the curiosity questions about, does it always happen at this fret? Does it always happen with this finger? Does it always happen with this string? Those would be my questions to pay attention to. Changing the gauge of your strings up or down by a few hundredths of a size will not hurt any instrument. So you can totally experiment with that piece on your own without any fear of hurting your instrument. So try heavier strings and lighter strings and see if that does have an impact. And then after that, you're generally looking at probably working with a luthier to help you make adjustments in terms of action and frets. Sometimes too, the frets need to be dressed because the fret itself has a little divot in it where the string has pressed into it repeatedly over time. So if you have a new buzz showing up, it may be not you because you've done the same thing and you've been playing for a while, but it may be a physical thing in the fret. And generally, asking around to the people who play other acoustic instruments for somebody in your area who does luthier setup work. It does not necessarily have to be a dulcimer specific luthier if you live in a part of the country where that is not something that's close to you. I always say, if the person who built your instrument is available to do setup on your instrument, that would be the ideal situation. But that is not always available to us. And so someone who regularly works on acoustic instruments is going to have a similar kind of experience with action and fretboards.
and in-person festivals who have a dulcimer doctor is a
Yeah.
great. If you are at a festival that has a dulcimer doctor, it's great to make an appointment just for a checkup, and you get to talk to someone who's cool and who loves dulcimers. You get to meet a friend, and you have someone
Yeah.
who helps you understand your instrument. There are other many luthiers who really don't understand how dulcimers work because they don't have necks. They,
Hmm.
it's fingers stretched over a box and or strings, and it's not the same. And so sometimes you can get some help from a, a luthier who has great experience with what they do, but maybe not dulcimer specific. So maybe like a generalist and you need a specialist, but it's worthwhile doing that. It for me also, like I mentioned with the recording experience, recording yourself playing and listening means I get to have a different ear when I listen. When I'm playing, I'm having the experience of the instrument vibrating, touching my body in some place. And I'm in it and thinking about everything. But when I listen to it separately, sometimes the experience of playing feels so good, and I listen to it separately and go, "Oh man, I'm not happy with something," and then helping me figure out and diagnose what it is I'm not happy about is
Right.
that playing and recording. If you can do a video recording like with Zoom or something, or have set up your camera and have it on your phone and do it, you can gain self evaluation experience that'll help you make that. Maybe this is something that's just me. I can try these techniques. Maybe it's something that I need to do with the dulcimer, and I can try these things. So that'll get you going in a long way down the path. Well, this is a great topic, May. Thanks for bringing it up. We have some things coming up that deal with this, like you have something Saturday.
I do. I'm doing a string changing Zoom party. I always try to change my strings around the time of corn tune. That has become a rhythm that just keeps me in fresh strings. So I'm gonna change my strings on Saturday, and so there's just a free come and go Zoom session on Saturday afternoon if you want to watch me change my strings, get some information about changing strings, or do it with me because it's intimidating and scary to do it by yourself sometimes.
And how do we find out about that?
So that information, I can share it on the Dulcimer Crossing Facebook page. I'll do that.
Excellent.
And then it will just be right there.
Excellent. That'll be wonderful. The other things are, you mentioned quarantunes, and this is the last week to sign up for the Quarantune Festival, the ninth festival, which is pretty darn amazing. There are seats open. There are concerts. There are T-shirts. There is live vending, which happens a week from tomorrow, and workshops on Friday and Saturday. Concerts Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and Sunday. One concert ticket gets you into all of the concerts. So there's lots of ways that you can take part in that, whether or not you can take workshops. But registration ends this Saturday. So that's one of those things to keep in mind that is coming up. We also have another event that I want to highlight, which is open. Registration is open for, which is taking place in March. Do you want to say anything about this, Erin May, since I did all the talking?
We are Dulcimer Crossing is hosting a 4 equidistant Dulcimer Day. And so we will have a variety of instructors who regularly play with a 4 equidistant string configuration on Mountain Dulcimer. Aubrey, Leo, Thomasina, Bradley, Grant, and Sue are all people who've been playing with a 4 equidistant setup for a long time. There will be a few different tuning options represented, some sort of basic technique things for how to get used to 4 equidistant string, as well as some more advanced things that you can do by having that setup. And so we're real excited. It'll be just like a one day, all day event on, oh, what's the date? It's in
March
March, right?
11th.
March
Saturday, March
11th.
11th.
So you can check all of that out. We'll post the direct link to that in the Facebook page too.
While you were talking, thank you for talking. I put it into the chat.
Oh,
And
you did it!
it'll
Hurrah.
be in the newsletter, as well as the string changing event will be in the newsletter. So
Awesome.
thank
And
you
then the
again,
next
Erin May,
Dulcimer Crossing
for
live event is in February with
that's
Rick
right.
Thumb.
So the hammer dulcimer focused one, yeah. And
Yeah,
Erin May did a wonderful chromatic one last week. And
it was really
workshop
fun.
and mentor level students get access to the archives and can view all of those. And we've had a good collection of instructors and topics, and I've been inspired by everyone. And
Me too. There have been some really amazing things. I find myself referencing the live things I picked up from those live events on a pretty regular basis. So
yeah.
they're worth it.
Well, thank you for joining us today. Make sure that you have joy through the music in your life every day. Don't wait just for the weekend. Dulcimer players are not living for the weekend. We're living for every day.
Yay! Play tunes every day.
Well, thank you, and see you
Thanks. See
next time.
y'all.